Good morning, dear friends. Today is August 5th, fourth full day of our 2021 retreat into the woods, and I'm extraordinarily happy to be here to be able to speak to you. While preparing for this talk, I found out an interesting thing. There is a very famous story that has been told, probably more famous in the East than in the West, but I remember hearing it when I was a child, about the 6 blind men and the elephant. And that the first recording of that written down is actually in a Buddhist sutra. So it may actually be a Buddhist story, but you never know because the Buddhists were just adopting whatever folklore was about then. And so for people who don't know, 6 blind men are examining an elephant. And one of the blind men is examining the ear and says the elephant is like a fan. And one blind man is examining the tusks and says the elephant is like a spear, right? And another one is examining the trunk and says it's like a thick snake. Another one has the tail and says it's a rope. The other one says it's like a tree trunk as holding onto a leg. And the other one who touches the side says the elephant is like a wall. And they're all really kind of right, aren't they? But they have different ways of looking at that. So dear friends, I'm going to talk today about a couple of things. And I'm just giving you my intent. I always like, we're talking about gratitude and intent. My point about this is I'm very, very grateful to be able to give this to you. It's really very, very nice. As I say usually in all of my classes and everything, I have no original ideas, none. Everything I do has been given to me by teachers. So I'm just being a conduit for that. My intent, my first part is to, and I also am a little bit loath to do 1 hour long Dharma talks. So I'm doing about a 20 to 25 minute Dharma talk. We're taking a break. Then I'm going to do another 20 to 25 minute Dharma talk, but they're linked. And my intent in the end of this is to, number one, instill your curiosity about the Buddhist path. I'm going to talk about 4 different ways that people have talked about the way that the Buddhist path is. Then I'm going to hopefully give you, in the second half, when we talk about what Thai has said, a very specific, skillful means. This is what we're trying to do today. We're going to talk about skillful means. And Thai has always been a person who is very practical. And my other intent is to let people just hopefully get them inspired to practice. So that's where I'm going with all of this. So there's 4 different masters that I want to talk about who were asked a rather interesting question. And they all had rather interesting answers. Tell me about the Dharma in 2 words. My favorite, which I'll go with first, just because it's a guy by the name of David Chadwick. Now, David Chadwick is a highly irreverent sort of Buddhist. He wrote a wonderful, almost more travelogue book. It's about 40 years old now, but it's really still wonderful, called Thank You and Okay, about living as a Zen monk and also as a layperson in Japan. It's really worth it. And you know how you always get on the, like, I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired of book jackets. If you take up any book jacket, even if it's a terrible book, there's like 16 authors saying, wow, this is great. Oh, this is the best. Of course, because they're all authors and they want you to do that. On his book jacket, there was somebody who was a Zen master that said, David Chadwick, years of expensive Zen training wasted. I like this kind of person who might be astounding. So the person he asked was Shinruki Suzuki, the head of the San Francisco Zen Center. Now, the San Francisco Zen Center is very, very important in the history of Buddhism in the United States. It was started in the 1950s and really, a really pivotal part about spreading the Dharma to the West. And he was a very formal teacher. He was not the kind of person that you would just kind of come up and say stuff. And apparently, though, David Chadwick, for whatever reason, I guess he had already been told he was irreverent, said, tell me about Buddhism in 2 words. which was like everybody gasps, what's he doing talking to the teacher that way? Suzuki said, everything changes. Everything changes. Everybody knows about the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who said you cannot step in the same river. Heraclitus, who said you cannot step in the same river twice. All these little moments, no matter how thinly you slice the time, everything is different. So even as you're remembering such things as, oh yeah, Suzuki said everything changes, you're forgetting something else. You're forgetting some sort of memory you had when you were in college, or the address of your first apartment or something. Things are moving in and moving out. You don't know the stuff that's moving out, of course. And in nature here, we are in this beautiful forest. Think about the dynamic aspect of the change that's going on out there. Things are growing, giving out oxygen, making trees, but there's also lots of individual things. I saw a nice snake yesterday. I'm sure it's having a fun time with some of those rodents that are out there. And as we even speak in our bodies, thousands of cells in 1 second, thousands of cells die, and thousands of cells are reborn. And as Ty has said, we don't have time to arrange for all of their funerals. So change is amazing. And if you look really at the microscopic level, you find that basically things are vibrating and changing and moving in such incredibly fast and strange directions. The number of synapses in your brain and how they are changing is just amazing. In Ty's model of stored consciousness is not this thing that just kind of sits there like a little bit of a lump. It's entirely active. It's moving and changing, and things are manifesting one way or another. And of course, one of our practices is to not be able to hold on to anything, but to know that everything is changing. On the macroscopic scale, by this time tomorrow, Greenland will be about 4 millimeters closer to the United States. It's moving. Greenland is actually moving to North America. The galaxies will be thousands of miles further apart. All of these things are going on, just an amazing amount. So this is really interesting. Of all things Suzuki could say, everything changes. And we all know that everything changes. We know that intellectually, but we don't always have it from the standpoint of how we behave. So I'm also going to right now give some gratitude to my 3 previous Dharma talk people, because they helped me give a few little things here. I'm going to be adding and talking a little bit about things that they have brought up. So anyway, that's the first Zen master, or the first Buddhist master. Suzuki was asked 2 words: everything changes. My second is, and I'm really, really kind of feeling bad that I don't remember the exact name. So in the Korean tradition, Korean Zen, and I could have put don't know, but I'm not going to put don't know, is they have a great tradition of the don't know Zen, which is, you don't have to know everything. Here it is. Why is there this? Don't know. Is there an afterlife? Don't know. Is the Buddha eternal? Don't know. Are you a bodhisattva? Don't know. I mean, they just had that kind of thing where you want to go, come on, you must know something. But anyway, one of these famous Korean Zen centers was asked to describe the Dharma in 2 words and came up with not always so. Not always so, which of course is 3 words, but it might be 2 words in Korean, but who knows? And I guess that's one of the whole ideas about that. You are an amazing creature because you've created your universe. You have taken in a tremendous amount of information from your senses, from your memories, And you've created the world that's around you, right here. You are responsible for the greenery that's outside those windows. You're responsible for all of you bodhisattvas sitting here and sitting on Zoom. You're responsible for that. You have that kind of thing. You have this raw data and you make this into that. And as I've mentioned before here, if I had the chance, and boy, I sort of hope I do someday, to have the Vulcan mind melt. If I looked into your mind, you would see that I would see that you see the room very differently. Everybody sees the room very differently. This is how this is. We are mostly creators and only a certain amount of experiencers. The actual long-term process that Thai is part of this particular lineage is one where it's called manifestation-only Buddhism, which is the idea that you catch things right as they are before you modify them. I'm guessing that if you are really good, you can probably see 10% of what's going on without modification. And the other 90% is your modification. If you probably are a really good practitioner in manifestation-only Buddhism, you probably can see maybe 50%, but you're still doing that. I write this up here, and you see not always so, and you have a whole library, a catalog, what that means. You speak English, this is what goes on. You can't just see that, even if you want to. You can't just see that as blue squiggles on a whiteboard. You can't do it. And so this is how we are. We are constantly doing, and those kinds of things are constantly being evaluated. Always there, always there. And so we need to be a little bit light on our feet, I guess is the best way to put it. As Jim was mentioning yesterday, and Thai is one of his great things. I don't know, it's one of these things that he keeps saying and saying, with perception, there is deception. Here's the interesting part of that. As I perceive things, I know I'm getting some things wrong. Here's the hard part. I don't know what. And hopefully with practice, we can do better with that. But we need to be open. We need to be, in order to be free of being enslaved by our desires and everything else, we need to be aware that there may be more information and the information we have is wrong. This is the most obvious example that probably happened to you. I woke up, Jane and I were in our hermitage, the Gabriel Hermitage. I woke up early the other day and there was a baby lying on the little table. And I said, what? And my first thought was, what is a baby doing here? Did Jane bring a baby and didn't tell me about this? And of course, it was all part of a half dream, but that's kind of thing. It's like immediately you say, there it is. That's an obvious example. But the less obvious examples are how we treat people and how things are going. So one of the things that you always need to be aware of is it's not always so, and then everything changes, that even the people around you are always changing, and they're not exactly the way you remember them. If you actually treat I know my friend Bob, I've met him, every day I have coffee with Bob, and I know exactly what he's about. I know what he's going to say. If you do that, you might miss the great opportunity to see his transformation, because everything is fluid. Isn't that exciting though? Everything is fluid. So the other thing, there was a Zen master named Ichiri who was asked to, and he wasn't asked to do it in 2 words, but he was asked to expound on the Dharma by one of his students. It's like 13th century. And he said, pay attention. And the student says, what, that's it? No, tell me more. There's got to be more than this. Pay attention. And he drew a calligraphy. And he said, pay attention means pay attention. And that's kind of all it is. So that the other one thing in 2 words is pay attention. We all know about this. This is right in our wheelhouse, right? This is the mindfulness practice. This is how we decide that maybe we'll find out about the world, is to actually pay attention. One of the interesting things, though, just to be aware of is, and so I've always wondered, after meditating for so many years, that I still can't keep the number of reps I'm doing when I'm lifting weights right. I forget to count. I lose count. How do I lose count on that? We have a part of our brain that In the Thich Nhat Hanh model, would be called manas. In the prominent medical model, it's called the default mode network. That constantly draws us to daydream. So you always have trouble finding and thinking about, oh, what's going on with that? What's going on with that? I know I was there. I know I read that, or the kind of thing, right? Where you're reading a book, right? And all of a sudden, oh, I missed these 2 pages. Well, your mind drifted off into the default mode network. And everybody's got it, including Buddhists. What default mode network happens to people who are practitioners, mindfulness practitioners, is they tone it down a little bit. But paying attention, and as in my particular kind of way of looking at it, paying attention to the 4 foundations of mindfulness, but particularly body, is really the most important. This is how we get clarification. This is the practice. This is one of the practices of the Dharma. Now, my 4th one is not a true story. I'm actually pretending that I could have this because I have the other data that says what he would say. If I asked the Dalai Lama to say, what is the Dharma in 2 words? I'm saying he would probably say, be kind. Be kind. I mean, I say that only because he has said kindness is religion. Isn't that nice? Kindness is his religion. So he would probably say, be kind. When in doubt, be kind. And one of the things that goes on with all of that, of course, is it sometimes seems to be like not the responsible thing to be kind, Shouldn't we worry about things like idiot compassion, stuff like that, idiot compassion. The best example of idiot compassion is the derelict kind of guy that is down and out and he's begging for change in front of the liquor store, right? I mean, there it is. He's suffering. Should we give him some money? Well, what he's going to do with it. And so those kinds of things are things that basically we need to kind of work on. And Ty has been very, very good about this. And that kind of thing is the way to kind of look at it. So these are the 4, only 4. And again, if we were talking about if we had, say, I don't know, 18 blind men looking at the elephant, some would say he's like a mountain, some would say he's like a forest and all those other sorts of things. So we know that this is not an exhaustive list, but not always so. Pay attention, everything changes, and be kind. These are 4 of what we would call Dharma doors. The Buddha has said there are lots of Dharma doors. He says there's not one way to become enlightened. There's not one way to become clear. He says there are 84,000 Dharma doors. I am definitely not going to go through the other 83,996 Dharma doors today, but these are 4 that are really accessible to people. People can understand this. This is how this goes. And it's very interesting how, the various ways that we look at this element. So this concludes my first talk. We are now all going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll go back to talking about how does Ty take this and make it into a skillful means. So thank you much. Put on pause. Record. See what it says. Thank you everyone for returning, even those people who sang well last night who now are enlightened. So that's really good. So we've got that. So what I'm going to talk about now is a skillful means that has been given to me by my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. I want to say a few things about Thich Nhat Hanh. He's definitely a scholar, and when people ask about, one of the criticisms is Thich Nhat Hanh, not very deep, but he has a lot of really great wisdom. Yet and so he knows all those kinds of things that you want to get into. He knows all about dependent co-arising and no self, and actually writes about things like the 3 Dharma seals and the 4 powers, et cetera, et cetera. But he's very practical. One of the things that I've seen him do when he goes on retreats and he has a Q&A, he says, only want practice questions. I just want practice questions. And his monks and nuns and people who he has like a big bowl, bigger than the one we have here. That's a bell, and that kind of acts as his mailbox. And I was on retreat once, and somebody like opened up and started talking about some sort of esoteric thing about, oh, I don't know, jhanas or something. And he says, sounds like a philosophical question. And went on to the next one. So he's very practical. And so he wants to give us the tools that we can do. I'm going to refer to where I'm taking this from. This is from the Heart of the Buddha's Teachings, the chapter on right thinking. Now, I'm going to tell you that it's really a good chapter, but over the years, I've heard so many Dharma talks where he's expounded on this that I think it's a little incomplete, but still very good way to do that. I also want to talk about ways that the language trips us up. I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday, how English seems to be very dualistic, maybe even aggressive, and that some of the Eastern languages are softer. The term for that is translated usually as right is a term called samyak, and it kind of means something like wise or appropriate. So as you know, when we do the 5, or maybe you don't, but when we do the 5 mindfulness trainings, we as a Sangha have kind of taken those things that say right this and put them into wise or appropriate. So they're, the right thing to say or the right thing to do is, not necessarily always the same thing. So everything has to kind of be appropriate. And, thinking, even though he says it's thinking, it's really kind of an action. So my thing was that I had these 4 things on my board over my desk. When in 2006, after having done about 25 years of general pediatrics, I decided, and it was great fun and a wonderful way to actually have the Dharma in action. I became a developmental behavioral pediatrician. And right above my desk were these 4 things, but right there so that I can always remember about what was going on. So for right thinking or wise thinking, Ty has these 4 little checkpoints. And again, you can just, this afternoon you can do this. You can just always go right through this and take a look at it. The first, and Jim talked about this several times yesterday.
Oh, we can't see. That's great.
Are you sure? I know Jim talked about this quite a bit yesterday, and it's really an important question, especially when you have the concept that the way you perceive the world is a construct of your own mind. And here's the real kicker about that. Your mind does not always have your best interest at heart. It always sounds a little strange, but your mind, especially after we've filtered it through 50,000 generations of hunter-gatherers, is very much invested in worry and fear. Hard to believe. So if it can make up a worry for you, it will. If it can make up a fear for you, it will. So, but anyway, getting back to that, are you sure is always a good place to go. I mean, some things are very obviously, are you sure? Am I sure it's green outside? Well, yeah, 99.999% accurate, although this could all be a dream and I wake up, it's really not green, but yes, there's green outside. But for many of the things like, why is this person seems to have it out for me? Are you sure? This particular political candidate is a person who is going to do the best job. Are you sure? This person I need to go talk to because I think they need my help. Are you sure? And it's always a good question to ask because we are never entirely sure if we're really honest with ourselves, we're never entirely sure. So I think that the one thing to kind of go about listening to is that this does not mean, of course, that we should be paralyzed into doing nothing. That's the common thing. Well, if you're not sure, you shouldn't do anything. And in fact, however, many people do operate out of that, but that's because their thinking mind says they're sure. Oh yeah, no, I'm sure it's just really bad to have gun control. I'm sure of that, so I'm going to vote against gun control. I mean, they're really sure. And your mind can get there. I mean, we see this actually in politics quite a bit. In politics, you have this kind of condition where if you seem to be unsure, you get voted out of office. And this is why a lot of politicians take these stances like they're sure. One of the best presidents, I think, ever was Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter had a real problem because he came around as seeming unsure at times. He'd say, boy, maybe we should do something different. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, she isn't sure. You know, in 2004 in the state of Wisconsin, we voted for Russ Feingold and George W. Bush. And the thing about it was really interesting was that they basically, their only thing they had in common is that they were sure. Whatever you want to say about George W. Bush, he was sure. And people had that. But we maybe should be able to, as people who are hearing the message, be a little bit more open to that. How many times have you seen that kind of thing happen where someone says, yeah, maybe I was wrong about that, and change their mind politically, and they get really dissed for it by their constituencies or the other party, that kind of thing. Anyway, enough about politics. This is just how we deal with it in our regular life. We should always be, once again, light on our feet. Say, am I sure? Are you sure about anything that's going on? Be very careful about it and have that kind of viewpoint on this. The second thing is what, oh, I guess it's to keep tenses the same. What are you doing? This goes into pay attention. What are you doing? What exactly is happening in this particular moment? Why are you taking this particular action? Why are you having this particular thought? It was under the term of right thinking. Habit energy is something that happens as it almost has as an underlying assumption that what worked before or what was useful before is useful now. So it does, but there's so many careers in sport where people have decided the weakness of that particular athlete is this. I feel like sometimes we want to step right in and do something. One of the habit energies is really, really common. Chris Hipp the other day mentioned that she thought it was just related to women, but it's not. To be there is all we kind of need to do. Mostly be aware is the most important thing. And the fourth thing that Ty talked about on his list bodhicitta. For people who are unaware, bodhi means true or good. Citta is kind of like the heart mind. It's not heart, it's not mind, it's more of our kind of emotional base. But it's really saying being kind. So if we get to a point to be made, what am I, are you sure? I'm really not sure. I've got these two kinds of things. Do I help this person here or do I help that person there? How do I go about doing it? What feels, what does it say to do one thing versus another? Kind of go with that really paying attention type of stuff. Hello, habit energy. Is there something about my past? Is there something about the kind of views that I hold that are pushing me in a certain direction? Just to be aware of it. I mean, they still might be correct. And when it really comes down to it, when it comes down to you do these three things and you're still not sure, the answer from both the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh is do the kindest one. I won't say you can't go wrong, because you can. You absolutely can go wrong doing the kindest thing. You can. Things may not work out really well. However, if on a good list of, say, 100 decisions, you do the kindest thing, you're going to be right many more times than you're going to be wrong. But this idea, of course, that because we can't always be sure of what's going on, that we don't do anything is not a way to live an awakened life. We live in a awakened life by just knowing that we don't know. Knowing that that's okay. Knowing that, it isn't really going to happen if I read one more article, if I do one more podcast, if I'm just not. I mean, that's just kind of how a lot of this is. We have to kind of take our best guess. Really, even when people feel like they're doing things on a sure basis, they're really just taking their best guess. That's all we can do, because we're human beings, we're flawed. We like to think we're really smart, but we're not. We can't get all these being way to have doing the kindest thing will generally lead to a happier person for ourselves, happier for our friends, family, co-workers, fellow citizens, happy for the planet. kindness is the way to kind of go when you're down to everything else. And really, pay attention to this. If you do the kind thing and it means it didn't work out. And it doesn't mean that you should not do the kindness thing again next time that opportunity comes out. Because again, you will at times be wrong about things. So I put this on my wall and it was really very, very useful. What was really interesting to me is 10 years of doing developmental behavioral pediatrics. And I had kids, for example, I had one child with Asperger's syndrome. I would not have been able to tell that I got a new laptop because it was a black laptop. It's like another black laptop. We walked in and said, "Oh, you've got a laptop." You know, that kind of thing. But all those people who were aware, no one ever asked me about this. I had, you know, this thing, "Are you sure? You know, what are you doing? You know, hello, habit energy, bodhicitta," right on my wall, you know, a regular 8x11 piece of paper. And no one ever asked about it. It's kind of interesting. It was kind of interesting to me that that was the way it was. But it helped guide a person get this particular type of therapy. Does this person get this particular type of medication? Is it safe for me to discuss this thing with the school? Is it safe for me to discuss this with the grandparent? All these questions were coming up like this. And this was what I kind of went for. And it served me well, and I think it will serve you well. But everybody needs to kind of try this. But this is a skillful means that Thai gives us. Question, are you sure? Question, what are you doing? And again, the bodyfulness of that, I think, is really important. Question, how low habit energy? Are you just doing something because you've done it before? And compulsively done it before? And I often ask people when they kind of keep doing that compulsive thing, how's that working for you? One of my friends who has recovered from alcoholism, he talks about the habit during his period of time when he was drinking. He'd be like taking the glass out, pouring the bottle of scotch, drinking and saying it out loud, you know, this stuff's going to kill me. I can't do this. And then take the drink. The habit energies are very, very, very strong. We always need to feel what our body feels like with habit energies. And of course, when in doubt, do the kindest thing. Do the kindest thing. Even if it doesn't work out this time, eventually, most of the time it will work out. Most of the time, the world does better if we do the kindest thing. So thank you all for your kind attention. Happy to be a conduit. That's all I am of all these other great teachers. Oh, I wanted to mention, so the four things are just four people that said things in 2 words. I thought of 2 others that just kind of worked with me. One, I don't know if he has any Buddhist background or not. E.M. Forrester. Does anybody know about E.M. Forrester? He has a 2-word phrase about how to live your life called "only connect," which is John Kabat-Zinn would probably mention. Trying to think of now what non-attachment awareness. So that kind of a thing. So everybody has their own little 2-word way of looking at this, just like everybody has their own. We're blind looking at the elephant, and we are kind of blind. I mean, we really are to a lot of what's going on. We have the advantage that by practicing, especially practicing in the Plum Village tradition, I think you basically can get a little bit of clarity. But you're never going to be entirely clear. You're going to have to go through your life making the best guesses. Let's just make better guesses and see how that goes. So thank you all for your kind attention. I'm happy to take any questions or comments that people have at this moment. Thank you. Aaron, you might want to get the Zoom back on in case there are Zoom people who want to ask questions. Yes. Is that Ann? Yeah, could you come forward, Ann, to like talk to Mr. Computer here? Actually, talk to Mr. Microphone. This guy. And you can take your mask down.
Come over here.
Right there.
Okay. I have a lot of trouble with the phrase idiot compassion, especially how you summarize the talk. Could it be like misguided?
Yeah,
something like that. Why the word idiot?
Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like idiot compassion could be something like codependence, or just naive.
Yeah.
So if you could explain that, thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, words fail me, they always do. Yes, probably a term that's been used by some very revered teachers who have used that word. So that's basically kind of like, okay, it's like everybody kind of gets into that. It's like, we don't call people gypsies anymore, but lots of people have called them gypsies. So when you hear that, you kind of know that. So yeah, probably I would say kind of uninformed or unskillful might be a way to go looking at that, as opposed to idiot compassion. So, but thank you for that. Anyone else? Larry?
Thank you, Paul. Very stimulating talk. There's only 4, but I think we could spend a lot of time. So I'll start with the first one. Are you sure? It's, I think, a question that I've used, but now that you've talked about it, I'm not sure. And the big question is, I look back upon how do we determine if we're sure?
Yeah.
Some examples. In my first career, I remember we had grand rounds in radiation oncology, and we would present research, and it would be this great study and published, peer-reviewed, and this is the way you need to treat.
Yeah.
And Maury Greenberg would raise his hand and say, "Work, and that's the way I'm always going to do it." And now we have a situation where supposedly, I've not actually seen the paper, but 97% of scientists in the climate crisis research agree that there's a man-made component that's significant.
Yeah.
97%.
Yeah.
But again, there are a lot of people who are not sure. So research I've learned to understand is, in many cases, it's used to confirm what we already believe.
Yeah.
And we don't change our mind, so we get so
Very
attached
much.
to it.
Yeah.
So then we have the sort of other extreme, and that is we have that the here and now, the personal, what do we actually experience?
Mhm.
And that could be what is called anecdotal. And does that one experience represent ends of the spectrum? So maybe if you could say something about that.
Thank you. Well, that's kind of in the wheelhouse of position. We always say that an N of 1 doesn't mean anything. If it happened, that doesn't mean it. We're going to kind of use that. And you see that sort of, actually, you see that all the time in very responsible journalism, like the New York Times and the Washington Post. They want to give an example of why something works. They find a person who that worked for. And then it says, well, it worked for this person, it's going to work for everybody. But if that's habit energy, that's habit energy. You know, that's where we look at that. Yes, in 1948, I treated this person. That's my habit energy. It's always going to work. Realizing that the diversity of human beings means, of course, that's not always going to work. And we need to kind of be sort of light on our feet about that. So the rider and the elephant, which Jim talked about yesterday, was really, really wonderful. This, are you sure, is the rider? What are you doing is the elephant. So the rider part is the intellectual part, the part that we're trying to make weigh these kind of decisions. This is not a data, this fact, that kind of thing that I hear, this is what I'm working with. It's not unimportant. What am I doing is the elephant. How do I feel about it? What's going on with that? And that's important. But sometimes, and I think that, you know, people who are physicians and psychologists would often say, you know, we know that that was kind of what people should be doing, but it just didn't feel right. You didn't know why, and you kind of did doing things. So in medicine, things are, it's really amazing in the 40 years that I've been practicing how things have changed. The #1 medication prescribed in 1980 in the United States, still on the market, is now number 183. If everybody was so sure it was really good in 1980, it's digoxin in case people are interested. Why is it 183 right now? I mean, so everything changes with this. And boy, in medicine, you see stuff that like when we had babies who were surviving in the 1950s and they were going blind, we said, oh my gosh, blindness is probably because they're not getting enough oxygen. They didn't ask them, are you sure? So they just gave them more oxygen and enabled blindness. Now they realized that oxygen was actually toxic to the eyes, but they didn't know. I mean, that kind of thing. The people who were light on their feet would say, maybe. Back to the story that Jim talked about yesterday. Maybe yes, maybe no. And it's not important that you get it right the first time. It's important that you're aware that if you're not getting it right, you're open to it. You don't fall into your habit energy. You don't decide, because I've made this decision, it's the right decision, and I'm not backing away from it. And my goodness, haven't we seen people get into trouble with that a lot? I'm going to do this no matter what. You know, that's kind of one of the things that happens with this whole idea about, you know, kind of decision bias. You know, there are people who have decided that they have a particular position on the vaccine, for example. And, you know, they're sure. And all the facts aren't going to make much difference with that. And so we need to kind of, if you're really a person, you would kind of be light on your feet about all of that sort of thing. And, you know, we always tend to think about it. Most of us here are kind of left leaning, but that the right is over people who do that. But we do that kind of stuff too. And we need to be aware that we do that kind of stuff at times and to be open to what other people have to say or do. Charlene Leonard, or Charlene Frozen. Charlene, you have a question?
Yeah, Paul, the 4 questions, right?
Yes.
Let's see, are you sure? How is that working for you? And what were the other 2?
It's, are you sure? I have a screen share for that at the end here that people can look at it. The first, are you sure? What am I doing? Hello, habit, energy, and bodhicitta, which is just the mind heart of kindness. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Our connection was intermittent. So are you happy is not one of the questions, although it is related to several of them.
Not on this list, but I think that if you're looking, does the whole conglomeration of these 4 points lead toward happiness? Sure. I mean, I'm happiness that I made the right choices for my patients, for example. That wasn't what I was going there with, but you know, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But even sometimes the part that the right thing to do might make you unhappy. I mean, this is a very big example for people in hospice, right? I mean, people are suffering, and often it's a decision to let people go. That's a source of great suffering. It's sadness, but in the midst of these questions, it is the right thing to do. So the right thing to do isn't always the thing that makes us happy, but it can be. And I think in the long run, it would be, yeah, just like doing the kindest thing. So, other questions or comments, anyone?
Thank you so much for your talk. Yesterday, Barry, and today you mentioned the term manas.
Manas, yes.
Manas, could you talk about that?
Yes, thank you. Manas is one of the forms of, there's 8 major forms of consciousness. 5 senses. So there's ear consciousness, eye consciousness, etc. Mind consciousness, store consciousness is the 7th one we talked about. But then there's 8th consciousness, which is manas. It's also called the lover, and it's called really interesting because until 2000, nobody even knew that the default network existed. They didn't even know. No one knew. Now we know the default mode network existed. And if you want to do a Google search to see how many people are doing research on the default mode network, it's exploding. But the default mode network in Manas, as described in the Abhidharma that Thich Nhat Hanh is involved with, which is also part of that manifestation school, and the plug, reading the book Understanding Our Mind is where you get a lot of this. He has like 6 or 7 chapters on Manas, is one of those things that the Buddhists have talked about for a long time. Ego, clinging to self, wanting to be right, that kind of stuff is what Manas is about. And it's a separate consciousness than the other 7 consciousnesses. And it, as you kind of have that form about, you know, you have the circle where a Manas kind of lies between the two of them. And every time one of those mental formations arises into your mind consciousness, Manas kind of perfumes it a bit, coats it a bit. It always gives a little bit of flavor to what you do. So Manas is a very important thing to know about. But if you're not really into the Buddhist psychology and not reading Thai, read about the default mode network. It's exact. I mean, it's pretty much exact. Years ago, people just kind of walking around in the forest figured this out, you know. And then people with 2,000. I mean, I can see this conversation sort of going on, you know. 2000. Wow, we found this thing called the default mode network. It's where all your daydreaming is. It's where your ego. It's where all that kind of striving goes. There it is. And the Buddhists say so. I mean, what? We've been talking about this for a couple of millennia, guys. I mean, you know, don't you get it? So any other comments or questions? Yes, Jay.
You talked about
Take your mask off.
at the beginning, and in general, the idea that the Buddhist path is to overcome pain and suffering. So in raising these questions, in a certain sense, by having more questions, in my mind, sometimes I feel more insecurity and connection suffering. Can you talk about how, like, the answers are in our Buddha nature that we can kind of uncover through the Buddhist teachings?
Yes, thank you. As my understanding of the Buddha nature, and Larry, I hope you could kind of go with it. The question was about where Buddha nature falls in, and then all of these questions make us feel uncertain. The first thing is, when I talk about what are you doing in hello habit energy, I am basically saying, go to your Buddha nature. What are you doing? It's in your body. Your Buddha nature is in your body. Hello habit energy, your habit energy is made of stuff that's related more to ego than to Buddha nature. It's kind of good to kind of know what that, to see how it goes. But the idea that all these questions bring up uncertainty is, yep, that's right. But that's life. I mean, that's life. My favorite, I know a lot of people have heard this, they've heard me give talks before. One of my favorite things is an old Chinese proverb which says, to be uncertain is uncomfortable, but to be certain is ridiculous. So, and one of the people who really talks about this a lot, if you want somebody to read who's not Thai, is Pema Chodron. Pema Chodron is always talking about the kind of uncomfortable with being, you know, being comfortable with uncertainty. There's all this unknown. You know, she has this kind of way of being where she says, well, you know, most people are groundless. And then you wait for the punchline. Like, yeah, but you're going to say something like, I'm practicing that, I'll get ground, right? She goes, no, you're just groundless. Get used to it, you know, and that kind of thing. And there's a certain amount of freedom, I think, in not trying to dig for the answers. I mean, that's really one of the things that kind of goes on. One of my students asked, and I'm still not sure I gave the right answer, goes under the line, are you sure? He said, well, it's practice that we're doing. That's what we're doing. He said, yep. And then you've got all this supporting philosophy stuff about how it goes on. I say, yeah, it's probably true. What if you just practiced and you didn't care about the other stuff? Would it still work? And my answer, and I'm going to also go back to are you sure, but I'm not entirely sure, was I think so. I think if you just practiced and didn't have to have a reason for practice and didn't have to justify it or go through all these layers, which we do as human beings, then it would still work. I think, I don't know. I'd be very curious if we could do that experiment, but I don't know if we can find anybody to say, well, I want you to do this, but don't think about it. I don't think we're going to get anybody like that. So be how human beings are. So yes, thank you. Any other questions? Anybody on Zoom have a question? Yes, Larry?
I just wanted to say that what I appreciated this week is that without any organization, sort of between the various talks and so forth, and not having a central theme, I really am like totally excited about the sort of overlap that I see from the different talks. And I think that's something that maybe will be a little bit of the basis of tomorrow coming together again, kind of thing. We can share that then.
Thank you. When we finally look at the elephant, what do we know about the elephant's tusk and ear, tail, and spine? All has the same DNA. All has the same basic nature. You know, elephant cells, the elephant cell in the brain has the same DNA as the elephant cell in the toenail. So all those people looking at the various parts of the elephant are all right. It's just happening. And if they get to the basic nature of the elephant cell, they will be correct. Again, penetrate whatever one with time is the idea that we find how this works for us. And he wants it to work for us. He doesn't want us to sit around and have intellectual discussions. He wants it in our real world, real problems, with difficult people, with our own individual. And one of his books, like if you read any of the books with peace in the title, just how I like to tell people that they're starting to go to that. It always seems almost, it's beautiful, but it almost seems so simple. You say, is that all there is? And sometimes you want to say, yeah, that's all there is. But it's a heck of a lot. And so it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to mean more than just pay attention. It doesn't have to mean more than everything changes. It doesn't have to. We tend to complicate it because we want to, and people who write 400-page Dharma books make money because you buy them, you know? So that's how that goes, but it's really more quite simple than that. So, Meredith.
In our discussions of Buddha nature, we bump into the question of absolute and relative bodhicitta.
Mm-hmm.
Could you help us work our way through this?
That's a really difficult thing to go, except I will say that absolute and relative bodhicitta are really pretty much one and the same. So people tend to have the idea that there is, and they're right about this, is that there is this kind of ethereal place to be. Beyond idea of right and wrong, as we did in that chant yesterday morning. You know, the great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. That kind of goes. That's kind of what people would call absolute bodhicitta, which means I'm not making a decision, I'm just being. But that's not really easy because we really, your average, say, oh, I don't know, Einstein bagel store, and they say, and you said like a bagel with cream cheese, and they say, well, what kind of cream cheese do you want to toast? I mean, what are they going to do? You know, I mean, you need to make the decision. What kind of bagel? You don't care. I mean, you know, some people in Einstein would be fine with that, but you know, so we make these decisions. Here's the thing. We make these decisions this way or that way all the time. And quite frankly, we can't exist in the world without that. That's part of that whole. We need a little bit of duality. Well, we don't need all that duality. We have that little bit of duality that we actually need to negotiate the world. That's great. But we make it way more than that. We make it way more than that. You know? The classic example, I think, of what people do is talking about our judging mind. You go to the movies with people. We have been going to the movies with people much since the pandemic, but remember what it was like. You go to a movie with a bunch of your friends. You're out on the sidewalk. You're not even at your car yet. And what do people say? Well, what do you think? How do you like it? You immediately have to say good or bad. You immediately have to get dual with it right away. That's kind of what we do. And to have an idea that kind of goes with like, don't know, is not acceptable. It's almost looked at as if you are being kind of a shallow person by not having an opinion. But not really. I mean, if you just decide for so many things, I don't have enough information for me to say where I'm going to be with this. I could, but most of the time I want you to stay away. Say, I don't have enough information. That's just all there is to it. And people are always real comfortable. And the other question is after you say, I don't have enough information, what can I give you? Some? I'm happy to tell you all about it. When it comes to when it comes to opinions, I really love the quote by Dave Barry, who says, "Everybody is entitled to my opinion." How we doing on time? 10:44. 10:44. Maybe one more question or so, or comment, because we're getting close to time here. Yes.
Actually, it's more of a comment than a question.
Okay.
It's just to go back to what Meredith was saying about absolute and relative.
Yes.
I think if we look at the text of the canon of the sutras, we can see that absolute compassion, the way the Buddha did it, is always implemented in the world as a particular instance of the absolute.
Mm-hmm.
And it can only exist in the world in particular instances.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think that relative compassion would also work. And again, I think that what it really comes down to, the people who are really deep thinkers about this, and they're not sure either, is that these delineations between absolute truth and relative truth are false. There isn't a delineation there. It's more dualism. The real world is this is the Pure Land, as people would say. So in one particular type of practice, there's actually a Pure Land temple in Milwaukee. People kind of die and go to the Pure Land where everything is like everybody's a Buddha. Thai has made it really clear, and doesn't that sound a lot like the Christian thing? It does. Thai has made it really clear. This is the Pure Land right here. All these Buddhas on Zoom, dude, they're just everywhere. There's Buddhas everywhere. So the idea that we need to go on a special retreat, hear a special teacher, do a special practice to experience our own Buddhahood or the Buddhahood of others is false. We don't need to do that. We just need to be open to the idea. You just need to acknowledge. So this is the practice that I do, and I would like to recommend it to you. I'm going to correct my teacher Ty, although I think if I told him why, he would be absolutely in agreement. When we bow, and you've seen, I do a lot of it. Some of the other people in the community do a lot of it. And we should have made more of an idea that when we meet each other, we bow. I bow, and in my mind, I say, the lotus to you. In the Gata book that the Buddha said, that Thai said, the lotus to you, a Buddha to be. Well, that's correct. You aren't a Buddha to be, but you're also a Buddha right now. You know, and as I forget which Dharma talk said, everything is perfect, but there's room for improvement. That's exactly what it is. So if we want land where there would be well, I mean, you're already there. Why do that? You know, we're already here with a bunch of Buddhas. It's great. Let's just all appreciate that we're here with a bunch of Buddhas. You know, and the little kind of differences that go on between all of the Buddhas, not important. And that's nature. Don't care about the differences. That's absolute bodhicitta and absolute compassion. So, thank you all for your kind attention today. And thanks much. Just on the share screen, I have a document all about what I just put up.